In this episode, I'm going to show how you can make Lightroom presets for real estate photography for both exteriors and interiors using the Flambient method. It's something that I've used on literally thousands of homes. I've refined them over the years. You've seen me do some of these, just touch on them briefly throughout various episodes that I have here on my YouTube channel. So I'm going to dig into those further here with not just the settings, but also how to create them, when to apply them, and also warnings that could come along the way with Lightroom to just be aware of depending on the camera and lens that you are using. Lightroom presets are something that are so simple to make that you really shouldn't be paying for these. So without further ado, let's get started. We'll first start out with a very simple preset doing something for an exterior shot. We're going to use this one as an example. This was just imported into Lightroom, no preset applied to it yet, but we're going to walk through and create this preset. Dramatic change when we go to what it was when it was just imported compared to then when we applied this preset. It's very simple to make, but there are some things to be aware of as you're making this depending on your camera and lens. Let's start from the top. If we see here when we first imported this, we can see that Adobe Color was selected by default. That is the world's worst treatment profile for processing RAW files in Lightroom. It is not what you want. If you notice in our preset, it was set to camera standard. That will vary based on your camera. Let's go back here. When we take a look at Adobe Color and we click on that to see the other treatment profiles, we can see there are Adobe ones, but those aren't what we want to use. Click on Browse. In this profile browser, there is a section called Camera Matching. You want to expand that, and that will then show the various profiles available for your camera that it detected. You can see here that I could have used flat, maybe landscape. I knew that I was shooting in standard mode, and that's fairly close to the standard treatment profile that I was using in the Nikon camera. In Nikons, they call this picture control, and in different cameras, they call them maybe the picture profile. Either way, when you were shooting something, this is what it looked like on the back screen of your camera when you were reviewing the picture. That's probably what you want. It's close to what you want. So we'll close that browser. Now we have camera standards set. There are some other settings here that we'll get to in just a second, but there's more important things first to take a look at, which also relate to the camera. First, we'll take a look at some of the detail. By default, Lightroom wants to put this sharpening way up to a value of 40 with no masking, and if you take a look at that by hitting Alt and moving this little slider, you can see that the white area is what's being sharpened. Everything's being sharpened. It's way too much. What I recommend from the preset, if we apply it, is that that sharpening should be around 30 with a mask of 30. With that mask of 30, if we press Alt and hold down the mouse here as we're clicking that value, we can see that the sky isn't being sharpened at about 30. So that's a better sharpening. We can go up here, the sky looks very smooth, and we can see that there's plenty enough sharpening around everything else. The next thing, before getting to the small adjustments of exposure, color, and whatnot at the very top, this is very critical in that when you first import your image, the lens corrections applied usually will just have remove chromatic aberration applied, and when you select enable profile correction, it should then detect the lens profile, but sometimes it won't. Sometimes you may see that the lens profile is set to built-in. And if you look at the bottom, you would see also a little information warning that the built-in lens profile was applied. That's because of the EXIF that was set in your camera so that you had auto distortion control and diffraction compensation and possibly vignette control also enabled. If you have any of those enabled, which you can find in the EXIF data, if you have any of those enabled, then Lightroom is reading those from the EXIF data and thinking that it doesn't need to apply corrections, which most of the time it should. My recommendation is to always have these various automatic things turned off and then do these lens corrections in Lightroom. Lightroom can't imitate 100% what was being applied here, especially to the RAW file, so it's best not to do that. Instead, what you want to do is set it yourself. You do that by, in the setup, setting it from default to custom. Then you can select the make and then the model of the lens. So in this case, I was using a Nikon camera and I was using a 20mm lens. Set that yourself in that setting for your lens correction. Either way, once you have that set, we can then adjust the other settings. But there is another error that could come up, and I'm going to cover that once we get into the interior, so stay tuned for that. Let's first though get back to this preset and finish it off. So applying that preset, then we can see everything. First, yes, we did set it to camera standard. We have our sharpening down here, which was 30 and 30, and we had the proper lens corrections applied to it, and now we can see the exposure settings. Now something interesting here is if you notice the white balance was 4800 with a tint of 13. That is only Lightroom's interpretation coming out of the raw file because white balance is in multiplier values. It's not using the value that it says, oh, it was 5500 Kelvin or 5000 Kelvin. Lightroom has to take those multiplier values that are also stored in the raw file and make its best guess. In this case, it did a pretty good job. The other settings, so you never change these anyways, unless you really have to. You should have already set those in camera. But you want to be able to set your contrast to about 10. Your highlights get taken down to about -60. Shadows go up about 60. Whites go up about 30. Blacks down about 30. Clarity is at 10, and then vibrance and saturation both are at values of 10. Now this will work for most of the exterior shots. There's still a lot more you could do, but it gets you a good starting point. At this point, you may want to say, well, I'll just maybe up the highlights a little bit, maybe a little bit more shadows in here, add a little bit more punch with blacks, whatever it is you want to do. This is where you would tweak the settings, but this would be getting you very close if we just went back and applied that one preset. Now that you've set these values, you want to be able to save this preset. It's very simple to do. All you do is go over here to this presets bar here, and you click on the plus sign. When you do, you select Create Preset. From here, you can create groups. You can see I have a group that's way down here for doing twilights. But you can organize them however you want. You want to save everything for this preset except for the white balance. For all real estate photography, you don't want to change the white balance. Whether it was exterior or whether it was interior, you want to make sure that whatever you set for white balance or what was automatically detected doesn't get changed. The only thing that you have to do now, though, is just type in what you'd want. You could call this your exterior preset. And if you make more than one, name it something else, like 1, 2, 3, something like that. Once you're done, you can then just click create and it'll create that for you. We'll just hit cancel. I've already got this one made. Okay, now let's talk about the interiors. This is a finished Flambient shot, and this is one of the presets, but there's something you need to do first, and that's the pre-processing preset. So taking the Flambient footage, there's of course the ambient shot, there's a flash shot, and in this case I did shoot a window pull. And by the way, if you're not familiar with the Flambient technique, I have a link down in the description for this video to download my book on interior photography. That'll get you started on doing Flambient. Very simple technique once you get that down. But basically here we've got these three shots here of ambient and flash and window pull, and we want to apply a preset to that. Now with this, it's going to be a little bit different in that I used a Nikon Z5 with an FTZ adapter and a Tachina 16-28 lens. So it was a different type of lens. And this is where we're going to have some difficulty with that lens correction that I mentioned before. Let's cover that first before getting to the rest of the preset, because the rest of it's fairly simple, very similar to what we just saw. Now here, if you enable profile corrections, it's going to say none, and it's going to say unable to locate a matching profile automatically. Don't worry about it, just set it yourself and then save this in your preset. So all that you would do is you select the make, and in this case I will just select Tachina, and it automatically detected what it was supposed to be. It's that 16-28. So anyways, let's back out of this. Let's apply this preset, see what all was done. Now I'll start with the flash shot here so you can see more of the effect. But what I'm going to do is apply a preset, and this one here I call Tachina 16-28 FTZ for no good reason. Now you can see we did something similar in that we also changed the treatment profile to camera standard. That just happens to be the profile that I was using while I was shooting, so I saw what the colors were while I was working with it. So you notice though, with that preset, no adjustments are applied because this is only doing some basic corrections before we do the Flambient blending. Once we do the Flambient blending, then that's where the rest of the presets for exposure, highlights, all that stuff comes in. So all that we did here was just set camera standard for the treatment profile or whatever it will be on your camera. The sharpening, once again, it's a 30-30, just like it did for the exteriors. And then just like we talked about the lens corrections that you have, the enable profile corrections made. And once again, you would just save that preset by going over here to add new preset, create preset, save everything but for the white balance for whatever preset you're going to name it. Now let's go ahead and take a look at what we would do to get these ready for the Flambient blending. That was applied to one image. Now you could go across to all these and just apply that same preset, but there's a few different ways you can do that. One, you can select all those images and you could hit the sync button down here. I don't like to do that. I like to do it a little bit differently. What I like to do is select this and go develop settings and copy settings. And you want to copy everything but the white balance. Copy that, and then I like to select the other footage, and then I would apply it by just right-clicking, go develop settings, and then paste settings. Now there's a lot of ways you could go about doing this. You could go through each image and say, you know what, I like this one better. Well, I'm going to paste it to this one. And there's keyboard shortcuts you can use for that as well, like Control-Shift-C and Control-Shift-V for copying and pasting those presets. But there's a reason I don't use the sync button, and that's because now that all these are corrected, which is great, these all look like they've had their lens correction applied, is that I want to make a few tweaks before I do Flambient blending. Here, I want to go through and lower that white balance, just a little bit too warm. Here on the window pole, it's a little bit on the bright side. I want to get a little bit darker, so I'll just lower the exposure just a tad. And maybe also here, I want to decrease the highlights. Sometimes I will. This case, I don't need to. Anyways, then I'd open these up as layers in Photoshop. So we'd go edit in and then open as layers in Photoshop to do the Flambient blending. So here I've done the Flambient blending just like I've shown in other videos and like I show in my interiors book, where we have a window pole at the very top that got our view. We've got then the luminosity blending mode here done with that ambient shot that was over top of the flash shot. We've got that there. So we would just layer flatten, save this, and now that'll be back in Lightroom. Now we apply the other preset. Now the next preset is very simple. It doesn't worry about any treatment profiles because at this point it's a TIFF file that comes back from Photoshop. Lens corrections were already done, so the only thing are just a few of these sliders. Now all you need to do, and I'll just do it right here, I'll use my light bump, and this is my favorite one here. Light bump did an automatic correction on verticals, which didn't do necessarily that bad of a job, but I might want to start with this one. Either way, they're pretty similar, but we'll take this one here. Now in here, let's take a look at what this bump involves. This is the preset, the final post-processing preset. And the contrast you can see is up to 10, the highlights are -75, shadows +60, whites +25, blacks -45, and clarity at 10. That's it. That's all that was applied to it. No sharpening is applied in the post-processing preset. However, if you didn't do any sharpening in your pre-processing preset, now would be the time to apply the sharpening. Either way, you only want to apply sharpening once. And once again, once you have a preset like this, all you do is you'd click the positive button over here on presets, say create preset, everything but the white balance, and then create it. Now, but this still isn't necessarily a finished product. I still see that this is a little bit too warm, so I will just take down the temperature, maybe just a tick, maybe about that much. Take out some of the reds just a little bit. I like that. And maybe too, I just want to take out some of those shadows a little too much. Make sure that I'm exposing to the right. So you can see that there's still a little bit of tweaking, but for the most part, that's all that's involved with making your own Lightroom presets for real estate photography.